Ferrari left Australia without the win, yet somehow looked more dangerous when the race was over than they did when it began. That is the contradiction pulling this whole season into focus. Mercedes took the result, Mercedes owned qualifying, and Mercedes still looked like the early standard. But Ferrari pushed close enough to change the feeling around the fight at the front, and that matters more than the final order suggests. Lewis Hamilton could already sense it inside the car. There was pace there, real pace, the kind that turns a solid opening weekend into a warning for everyone watching. And that warning only gets louder when you look at what Ferrari are preparing next. Fred Vasseur did not talk like a man waiting patiently for round 4 or 5. He spoke like someone who knows the first gap must be attacked now, after Melbourne. Ferrari made it clear that updates could arrive immediately, and that shifts the pressure straight onto China, where the sprint format gives teams almost no time to settle the car before the serious sessions begin. Hamilton also made the mood inside Ferrari impossible to miss. He said there were a lot of positives to take, and that with a couple more laps, he could have had Russell. That is not empty optimism. The data tells a completely different story, because Ferrari were not just chasing a podium, they were brushing up against a real fight. Now the story moves away from simple race result talk and into something far more important. Ferrari are not only trying to close the gap with setup work or cleaner execution, they may be ready to lean on a new aero idea that could change how the car behaves where it matters most, on the straights, odds under pressure, and in a weekend where every minute of preparation counts. That is why Australia cannot be judged on its own. It was only the first clue. China is where this stops being a promising start and becomes a completely different kind of test. China changes the whole picture for Ferrari, and that is why Melbourne cannot be treated like a final verdict on the order at the front. Albert Park asked one set of questions, Shanghai asks another, and the teams now have to answer them almost immediately. Ferrari leave Australia with proof that the car can race near Mercedes, but China is the weekend that decides whether that speed travels. This is not just another stop on the calendar. It is the first sprint event of the season, with barely any time to settle the setup, lock in the balance, and understand where the real edge will come from. That matters because Shanghai does not punish the cars in the same way Melbourne did. The longer braking zones should make energy recovery less painful, and that could shift the balance for teams that were chasing answers 1 week ago. Fred Vasseur already pointed to that difference when he said China would be almost the opposite of Australia in terms of energy demands, and Charles Leclerc made it clear that being sharp from the first session will be crucial. There is no comfort window here. 1 hour of practice is all the teams get before the sprint format starts squeezing every mistake into something costly. So now the pressure moves from raw pace to execution under stress, and Ferrari cannot hide behind potential anymore. If the car is genuinely close to Mercedes, Shanghai should let that show up in a completely different way, with different corners, different battery demands, and a weekend rhythm that can punish hesitation. But here is where the pressure tightens even more. Ferrari may have reached China with a car that suits the track better, yet that will only matter if they make the right call when the race starts twisting in real time. Ferrari made the call that split the race open, and for a few laps it looked like they had just handed Mercedes control of the afternoon. The safety car window arrived early, the pit lane decision had to be made instantly, and Mercedes reacted without hesitation. Ferrari did not. Lewis Hamilton was not comfortable with that choice, and his radio made that clear in the moment. Because he could already see the danger of letting both Mercedes cars grab the cheap stop. From the outside it felt obvious. Ferrari had missed the move, but the deeper you go into that decision, the less simple it becomes. The reason Ferrari stayed out was not confusion, it was belief in a different race taking shape. Pitting under that neutralized phase saved Mercedes a huge chunk of time, but it also seemed to lock George Russell and Andrea Kimi Antonelli into an extremely long run on hard tires. With so many laps still left, Ferrari had every reason to think that one stop against two could turn the whole race around later. Fred Vasseur admitted after the race that the tire life shocked everyone because the degradation was far lower than expected. Ferrari were not protecting a safe finish there. They were pushing for the one path that could actually beat Mercedes. What makes this call so important is that it changed how Australia should be judged. Ferrari did not lose because they lacked courage. They lost because the race refused to unfold the way almost everyone expected. More failures never came. Another timely interruption never arrived. And Mercedes managed the hard tire run far better than the race had first suggested. That is where this story gets complicated, because once the final order settled, the bigger question was no no longer about one pit call. It was about how much pace Mercedes were really holding back, while Ferrari tried to force the issue. Mercedes won in Australia, but the clean headline hides a much messier truth underneath. Once the race settled into its longer rhythm, Ferrari were not dealing with a runaway leader disappearing into the distance. They were dealing with a front-running team that looked calm, controlled, and never truly forced into panic. That difference matters. A car can look unbeatable when it is managing the race from the front, yet still be hiding a fight that never fully reached the surface. What no broadcast covered is this: Ferrari did enough to make Mercedes protect the race, not just cruise through it. That becomes clearer when you follow how the stints actually developed. Mercedes had grabbed the cheap stop, but then George Russell and Andrea Kimi Antonelli still had to carry those hard tires much deeper into the race than anyone had expected before the start. Ferrari were watching for the tire drop, waiting for the pace to crack, and waiting for another interruption that would drag the leaders back into reach. It never came. Instead, Mercedes kept stretching the run and still maintained control, even while using lift and coast to protect tires and manage the car. That is the detail that changes the read on Melbourne, because a team that can preserve and still hold the gap may not have been showing everything. Now the pressure lands on a much bigger question than simple finishing positions. If Ferrari were genuinely close on race pace, then China gives them a chance to turn that pressure into something visible. But if Mercedes could manage the race that comfortably while still keeping a margin in hand, then Ferrari are chasing more than a small setup fix or a cleaner Sunday. They are chasing a hidden layer of performance. Oh, and the next part of this story starts inside the Ferrari garage, where the response may already be taking shape. Ferrari are already moving faster than the calendar usually allows, and that tells you how seriously they took what Australia revealed. Teams normally want a little more time before rushing fresh parts into the fight, especially this early in a new rules cycle, but Ferrari do not look interested in waiting for the comfortable window. They saw enough in Melbourne to believe the gap can be attacked now, not later. That shifts this story from race analysis into factory response. The car that arrived in Australia may not be the same Ferrari that rolls into the next real pressure point, and that changes how every rival has to read them. The most intriguing part is where that response may be coming from. During testing, Ferrari trialed a rear wing concept that stood apart from the more familiar active aero ideas around the grid. Instead of behaving like a simple extension of the old DRS style thinking, this version pointed toward a more aggressive way of cutting drag when straight line mode is activated. Fred Vasseur hinted that updates were coming soon, and that makes this concept more than a curiosity from preseason running. The number Ferrari did not publish was the one that mattered most, because the real gain is not a flashy top speed figure. It is whether that wing can free the car on the straights without making it nervous when the driver leans on it. That is why the next stage of this fight may not be decided by strategy alone. Ferrari could arrive with a car that is sharper, faster in the places that matter most, and better suited to a weekend where there is almost no time to hide weakness. But even that does not settle the biggest doubt hanging over the front of the grid, because if Mercedes still have another layer in reserve, then Ferrari are not just chasing an upgrade battle, they are walking into a showdown with a team that may not have shown its full hand yet. Mercedes left Melbourne with the result everyone saw, but the bigger story may be the one nobody could measure properly from the outside. They were quickest when the weekend demanded one lap speed. They controlled the race once the order settled, and yet there was still a strange feeling that the full picture never appeared. That is what makes them so dangerous right now. A team can dominate loudly, or it can dominate quietly while giving almost nothing away. Mercedes looked like the second version. They won the opening round, but they may have done it without ever needing to expose where their real ceiling actually sits. That suspicion only grows when you look at how the race was managed once Ferrari stayed in touch. George Russell and Andrea Kimi Antonelli were not driving as if every corner had to be attacked with maximum force just to survive. They were being told to protect the tires, use lift and coast, and still the buffer stayed under control. That matters because the 2026 power unit rules create a huge reason to stay smart about what you reveal. If one manufacturer looks too far ahead, the rest can gain extra room to develop and close the gap. Nobody in that garage expected what came next. Because the Mercedes advantage in Australia may have been big enough that their safest move was not to show all of it, and that is where this title fight stops being a simple Ferrari comeback story and starts feeling far more dangerous for the whole grid. If Mercedes were already controlling the pace while protecting the car and managing the race, then Ferrari are chasing a target that may still be moving faster than it looks. China is the weekend that can finally drag the truth truth into the open, because if Ferrari really can pressure them at the front, then Mercedes may be forced to reveal whether Melbourne was their limit or just their calmest version. The championship picture is starting to sharpen far earlier than most teams would have wanted, and Ferrari know that is exactly why China matters so much. Australia did not just hand Mercedes a clean win, it gave them the first chance to plant control at the front while the rest of the field were still trying to understand these new cars. Ferrari stopped that opening weekend from becoming a simple Mercedes statement, and that alone kept this from turning into a one-team story. But the real pressure now is on what comes next, because one close race is interesting, while 2 straight weekends of pressure can change how the whole paddock reads the season. McLaren and Red Bull cannot ignore that either. Lando Norris finished more than 50 seconds behind the winner in Australia, which tells you how far the race drifted away from the teams outside the front two once the order settled. That gap may not stay that large for long, but early points still carry real weight when development is moving this fast. Ferrari fans have reason to believe because the car already looked quick enough to threaten podiums and more. Mercedes fans have something even stronger because George Russell and Andrea Kimi Antonelli turned that opening chance into maximum control. And if Ferrari brings speed to China without matching that level of execution, the points table will start rewarding Mercedes before the fight has fully opened. That is why this next weekend is bigger than a normal second round. It is a chance to decide whether Australia was the first chapter of a true front row war, or just the race where Ferrari looked close before Mercedes quietly pulled the rope tighter. If Ferrari can force a direct fight at the front, the title conversation changes immediately. If they cannot, then the damage starts spreading beyond one Sunday result and into the shape of the whole season, and that brings everything down to one final test, whether China will expose the real Ferrari or the real Mercedes. Ferrari now arrive at the point where promise is no longer enough. Australia gave them belief, gave Hamilton real encouragement, and gave the paddock a reason to stop treating Mercedes as untouchable. But belief only carries value when the next race confirms it under a completely different kind of pressure. China is that pressure. Different track demands almost no time to prepare, and the chance that Ferrari show up with a sharper package than the one that opened the season. This is the part that changes everything, because a fast car in one race is a hopeful sign. While a fast car across 2 very different weekends becomes something the whole grid has to respect. If Ferrari can turn that pace into a direct fight at the front, then the story of Melbourne changes instantly. Their strategy call in Australia stops looking like a missed opportunity and starts looking like the first swing in a much bigger battle. Hamilton and Charles Leclerc would suddenly have the platform to force Mercedes into a real response. Not a controlled race from clean air, but a proper contest where every lap exposes what each car really has. That is the only scenario that can answer the doubt hanging over this season. The real story was never about the lap time. It was about whether Ferrari could drag Mercedes out of comfort and into a fight they could no longer manage quietly. And if that happens, the whole shape of the championship begins to move. Mercedes may still have the stronger hand, but they will have to show it. Ferrari may still be chasing, but they will be chasing with evidence, not hope. That is why China is more than the second round on the calendar. It is where the opening tension of this season either hardens into a real title fight or fades back into admiration for a team still sitting one step ahead. Melbourne gave Ferrari a signal. China decides whether that signal was the start of a war or just the noise before Mercedes pull away.